Hello everyone, how's it going? In this video we will talk about secondary constructors in Kotlin. So we can have a secondary constructors in Kotlin which are prefixed with the constructor keyword. A class can contain one or more secondary constructors, but we can only have one primary constructor. And secondary constructors are created using the constructor keyword. So let's see an example where we are going to create a secondary constructor. So I'm going to remove all this code that we have from the previous video. So we are going to create a class called student, and we are going to have two variables in it, a name, and the second one will be age. Then I'm going to define a secondary constructor. To define a secondary constructor, we are going to type constructor keyword, and we will accept two parameters, name and age. Then we'll have the body of the secondary constructor. So the difference between the primary and a secondary constructor is that in primary constructor we do not have this block of code right here. So instead we use the initializer block. And in a primary constructor we have the declaration after the class header, like after the class name we declare the primary constructor. And we can also have only one primary constructor, but in case of secondary constructor we can have a multiple. So let's go ahead and set the values of the class variables. So this dot name is equal to name that we receive from the constructor, and this dot age is equal to age. And we are going to create another function called print details, and this will just call a println function, and this will type name is name and age is age. Now we are going to create an object of student class. So I'm going to type while student of type student equals student. So we are going to pass two values like max, and let's pass a 20 for the value of age. And then I'm going to call print details function on this object. So let's go ahead and run the program. We can also use a primary constructor as well as secondary constructor in the same class. By using primary and a secondary constructor in the same class, secondary constructor needs to authorize to primary constructor. So secondary constructor needs to delegate to the primary constructor, and this is done using the this keyword. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to create a class called, let's remove this first. Let's create a class called info, and here we will have a primary constructor, and let's receive one argument called password in it. Then we'll define the body of the class, and inside this class let's define a secondary constructor, and inside this constructor we will receive three arguments: name, which will be of type string, id, which will be of type int, and then we'll have password, which will be of type string. I'm going to call a println function. Oops. Let's call name equal, and same goes for id, and let's print id, and password. So let's create an object of our class. So let's call this var my info of type info, equal to info. Let's pass max. For ID, let's pass 21, and let's pass password for the password. So now let's run the program to see the output. So I'm going to click on this play icon. So here we can see our program is up and running, and we get an error saying that primary constructor call is expected on line number 8. So keep this in mind that whenever we are using a primary constructor as well as secondary constructor, the secondary constructor should delegate to the primary constructor using the this keyword. So we have to call the primary constructor here this, and then we are going to pass the password that the primary constructor is expecting. So let's run the program again. And here we can see we have the desired output. So name is equal to max, ID is equal to 21, and password is equal to password. So that's how we can use a primary constructor with the secondary constructor. So let's see an example where we have multiple secondary constructors in one class. So let's remove this. Let's create a new class called add. And let's have 3 secondary constructors. So let's create the first one, and this will add 2 integer numbers. Here we will call println function, and let's print sum of a plus b equals a plus b. Let's create 2 more constructors. So I'm going to copy this, and here we'll receive 3 arguments. C, which will be of type int, and we'll print the sum of 3 numbers. And in the last constructor, we will print the sum of 4 numbers. Let's remove this from here. Sum of a plus b plus c plus d equals to a plus b plus c plus d. So here we have a class that has 3 secondary constructors. Now let's write the main function. Let's write code inside the main function. So we'll call add. Let's create an object first. So we'll type var add1 equals to add, and let's pass 5 and 6. Let's copy this and create 2 more objects. Add 2 and add 3, and here we'll have 5, 6, 7, 7 and 8. So here we can see we have 3 secondary constructors, and we are calling them by creating objects of add class. So let's run the program to see the output. So here we can see we have the sum printed in the output window. So one important thing to note is that a secondary constructor may call another secondary constructor of the same class using the this keyword. So let's modify this class a bit. Let's just remove this secondary constructor. And let's call this secondary constructor from the first secondary constructor that we have. So we will type this with a set of parentheses, and let's pass a, b, and let's say the third value, we'll keep this as a constant, and let's set this equal to 7. So in this program we have called the secondary constructor using the this keyword, because invoking of that constructor, this constructor required 3 parameters, so a, b, and c. We'll remove this call. So let's go ahead and run the program to see the output. So here we can see we have sum of a plus b plus c equal to 18 and sum of a plus b equal to 11. So if you observe, we are calling the secondary constructor like this one, but the output of this constructor is printed first in the output window. So this is because whenever the control reaches this constructor, this immediately calls this secondary constructor instead of printing the output right here. So then the control will come down to this constructor, it will execute this constructor body, and after its execution it will run this block of code right here. So that's the flow of execution if we have multiple constructors. The most common use of secondary constructor comes up when we need to extend a class that provides multiple constructors that initializes the class in different ways. So the real use of secondary constructors come with inheritance, and we are going to take a look at inheritance in the upcoming videos. So one last thing to note is that what happens if we do not have any primary constructor, but we will have an init block and a secondary constructor. So let's copy some code and paste it right here. So we will have a class called Constructors, and here we have an init block and a secondary constructor. Let's create an object of this class in the main function. So I'm going to type constructor. Let's pass 1 inside. So let's go ahead and run this program to observe the output. So here we can see we have init block printed, and then we have the constructor1 printed in the output window. So even if the class has no primary constructor, the delegation to secondary constructor still happens implicitly, and the initializer block are still executed. So the initializer block executed first, and then the delegation to secondary constructor is made, which prints the constructor1 to the output window. So when this program runs, the control first reaches the secondary constructor. Since we are calling the secondary constructor, as we can see, we are passing the value 1 here. When the control reaches this point, it will automatically make a call to the primary constructor. So this will be an implicit call. We have not written here. The control reaches the primary constructor, and after execution of the primary constructor, the control will come to the init block. So all the init blocks will run after execution of the primary constructor, and after that our secondary constructor will execute its block of code. So that's the flow of execution for this program right here. Alright, so that's it for this video, and in the next one we will take a look at inheritance in Kotlin.